Hello and welcome back. I'm Erica with Revival Threadworks, and today we're going to be making this ultra versatile project bag. So this particular project bag was made for a little one, so it's got a really soft handle. Obviously it's in kid prints. It's about 12 inches by 16 inches, but you can alter this pattern and make it whatever size you want to for whatever project you want to. They're great for kids, they're great for adults. So if you're excited to make this bag with me, then let's get started. Okay, so to get started, let's go ahead and talk about the supplies that you're going to need for this project. Now, I already have a pre-quilted piece of fabric. This is a piece of fabric that it was much bigger, but it was a piece of fabric that I had quilted this past Christmas for a project that I didn't end up doing. So I decided to go ahead and cut it to shape. So I'm going to tell you what you'll need to get to this place. So you're going to need a piece of top fabric, a piece of bottom fabric, and a piece of foam that are going to be 14 inches by 18 inches. Once you quilt it, which is what I've already done, and I've already trimmed it to size, the size that I trimmed it to is 12 inches by 16 inches. So like I said, to get started, you're going to need a 14 by 18 little quilt sandwich here. You're going to quilt it all up, and then we're going to trim it to 12 by 16. Okay, we're also going to be using bias binding in this project. And I've already done a tutorial on bias binding. It was one of the very first few little videos that I did, so it hasn't had a lot of traffic. However, I don't want to take the time to demonstrate how to do bias binding in this tutorial, so I am going to just put a link down below to the bias binding tutorial. But to do the bias binding, you're going to need a 15.5 by 15.5 inch square of whatever coordinating fabric you want to use. And then for vinyl, we're going to go ahead and do the vinyl on the front of this project pouch because I think that vinyl is going to be a little bit more sturdy. I've done several of them using mesh, but I do like the vinyl so you can see clearly through it, and it adds a little bit of stability. So if you have something inside your project bag that's a little pokey, then you're going to be able to keep it, intact. So you're going to need 8 by 17 inch piece of vinyl. And I've gone ahead and left the little tissue part of it on here just so that I can run it through my machine without having any issues. Then for the little bottom part we're going to do a little trim piece here on the bottom. You're going to need a 6 inch by 16 inch piece of fabric, and then we are actually going to fold that in half and kind of double stabilize it. So you're going to need a piece of interfacing that's 3 inches by 16 inches. Okay, so this is for the bottom. And then for the top pieces, you're going to need a 2 inch or 2.25 by 16 inch piece. You're going to need a 3 inch by 16 inch piece. And then for the interfacing up there, we're going to need a 1.5 by 16. And then for the handle, you're going to use a 12 inch by 4 inch piece. And then for the interfacing, 1 inch by 12 inch. So on projects that have little hands, which this particular project is for a little hand, I like to use the interfacing method on the handle versus the strap because the strap is a little hard. And so for little hands, I think that it's just a little bit more comfortable for a little hand if it's a little bit more flexible. So because this is for a little hand, I'm just going to use the interfacing method. You're going to need an 18 inch-ish zipper with a zipper pull. You're going to need obviously scissors, and because we're going to round the corners, you're going to want something to round the corners. So I use these little round rulers. It's a 2.5 inch round, so I can just trim it up. You can use a can of vegetables or whatever it is to round your corners, whatever you want to do. You're also going to need clips, you're going to need pins, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I would want to do, so sometimes when I'm making things, I like to go ahead and get started with my least favorite projects first, and bias binding, when it comes to assembly like this, is definitely one of my least favorite projects. So I'm probably going to go ahead and make my bias binding first. So I'm going to set that aside because that would be probably the thing that I would start with if I were starting this from the beginning. But honestly, the next thing I would probably do would be go ahead and iron all the interfacing onto any of the pieces that need interfacing. And that's just because I don't want to be taking my iron out 20 different times. So I'm going to go ahead and just do them all now. So we're going to take that 6 inch by 16 inch piece and then that 3 inch by 16 inch piece, and we're going to put those together. So we're just going to take our piece here, the 16 inch by 3 inch piece, and we're going to fold it in half and press right there in half, obviously. And then we're going to add our little bit of interfacing, and we're going to press it again. So just put that right there in the center, fold it right back over, and it might stick out just a little bit. I know I always try to make it not stick out, but it's okay. If it does stick out a little bit, that's okay. We'll just trim that up in the end. So now we're going to take that piece and set it aside. We're going to take our handle and go ahead and press the handle. So on your handle piece, this is 4 inches by 12 inches. We're going to take it and fold it in half and press. Now my iron is absolutely scalding, so in just a second here, I may have to take a little breather. We'll see. It should be okay. So now we're going to take it, open it back up, and then we're going to take these pieces and fold them into the center. So we're going to fold them towards that crease that we just made, just like this. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. And then now we're going to take that 1 inch by 12 inch piece of interfacing, and we're just going to pick a side and iron that in place as well. I'm just going to go ahead and open this up just so that it's easy to get to. So we'll go ahead and press that like that. Nice and quick, because I don't want to iron away all of my little creases that I made. Then we're, ooh, yeah, well, that's hot. That's the hot I was talking about. Then we're going to fold it back towards the center just like that. And then we're going to press it over again. Okay, we're going to make sure that those sides meet. Now my interfacing piece appears to be just a little bit too big, so it's struggling to meet that side, so I'm going to force it just a little bit. No big deal. We're just going to line up those folded sides with each other, and now we're going to press one more time. Now this is going to give us our strap. So our strap is actually going to be top stitched all the way around. Both of these edges can be raw, so it's really not that big of a deal. You know, just sew you can sew just these two sides, or you can sew all the way around. I would just recommend sewing all the way around. But like I said, keep your edges raw. Go ahead and put a couple clips there so we can save that and take it over to the machine. So now we have that piece ready. Now we have a binding piece that's going to bind the vinyl. So that would be the, let's see, I have a piece of paper, hang on. That would be the 16 inch by 2 1/4 piece. So I'm sorry. We're just going to fold that over and iron that in half. I have so many little measurements in this project that I had to write them down. Normally I can remember the measurements pretty decent, but with this one I had so many different measurements that I wrote them down, and I did not commit them to memory, so therefore I'm having to reference my little piece of paper. Anyway, we've got this one folded in half and pressed, and we're just going to set that one aside as well. Now here's the one, the other piece of the top part. This is the 3 inch by 16 inch. We're going to fold that one in half and press. Okay. Okay, and now we are going to just add our little bit of interfacing there, fold it back over and press again. This just gives it a little bit of stabilization, so that way, you know, it just looks a little bit better. It performs a little bit better. I like to interface them. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I do like to interface just so that, like I said, it adds just a little bit of strength. Now I do want to point something out. So here's the way we're going to actually lay this out. So here is your, actually, let me get my iron out of the way real quick. So here's the way this is actually going to be set up. So I've got this set up as my outside piece. This is what's going to face the inside. So this little 6 inch by 16 inch piece that you folded in half is actually going to sit along the bottom here. We're going to attach this to the vinyl. And then this little piece here that's the binding piece is going to bind the vinyl, bind to the vinyl rather. Then it's going to have our zipper here. So we'll just attach the binding to the zipper. And then this top part will also attach to the zipper. So all we are really going to see on this zipper is the teeth. And that's why I chose a pretty rainbow teeth on my vinyl, is just so that we could make them nice and, you know, pretty. And then, you know, this will be the handle, and then this is also the fabric for the binding. So this is the way we're going to lay this out. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to work on the zipper. We're going to work on attaching the top part to the zipper, and then we're going to work on attaching the binding to the vinyl, and then having that part of the zipper as well. So when we go over to the machine, we're going to go ahead and do several functions at once. I'm trying to reduce the time that my videos run, and the way I've been doing it is every single step I'll show here, then I'll show at the machine, then I'll come back here. So this time I'm just going to try to condense just a little bit, just for the sake of time. So hopefully we can, you know, cut this down just a little bit. Hopefully I'm still explaining things well enough. If it turns out that I'm not explaining things as well for you, please let me know and I'll go back to the longer form. I just thought that with this one, it, you know, might just be a little bit faster if we do it this way. So you're going to take your vinyl. So see, it'll fit like right here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add the binding to the top of the vinyl. So we're just going to take your little binding strip. Now, my binding strip is actually a little bit longer than the vinyl, but that's because I cut it a little bit longer. What I told you to do is cut it to the actual size of this. So yours may not hang over like this if you follow my cutting directions. So just beware. What you're seeing here is just me being a little bit generous with my measurements. You do not have to be. If you want to be, you certainly can. But you're going to choose whatever side that you want to and take this folded piece and attach it. Just clip it to the top. And we're going to take it over to the machine and we're going to attach it. And then once we attach it, we're going to fold it over to complete the binding. So we'll go ahead and do a 1/4 inch seam across here. And then we're going to fold it over and then we're going to attach it to the back side. Okay, so we're just going to bind the top edge. Then we're going to take that top edge and attach it right here to the zipper. And then we're also going to take this part and attach this to the zipper. And then while we're over there, we're also going to work on the handle. We're just going to top stitch the handle. Okay, so we're going to do 3 different things. And when we get back, we're going to talk about how we're going to attach this piece. So let's go over to the machine and work on these few pieces. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and top stitch my handle. Now I've put on the number 10 edge stitch foot. This is a Bernina foot, but I know that several different manufacturers have a foot that's similar to this. They call it, I think, the stitch in the ditch foot. It's got some sort of a little guide like here. So what you do is you put it on your machine, you move your needle over to the left, and then when you're ready to sew, you put your fabric under here, press it up against the guide, and it gives you an almost perfect top stitch. So that's what I'm going to do here is we are just going to go ahead and top stitch all the way around this entire strap. I like to start with the side that's got the opening. So we've got those 2 folded sides over here for the opening. So I like to start there and then we'll just go all the way around. Okay, and so now we have a perfectly top stitched little handle. If you can see how clear and straight those lines are, again, it's just due to this edge stitch foot. So I'm going to go ahead and take the edge stitch foot off so that we can start working on our little binding. So we're going to get this out of the way, and now we're going to work on the binding. So when we were over at the table, we just attached this binding. We just folded it in half and ironed it and clipped it to the vinyl. It does go ahead and get started. We're just going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're just going to sew that binding right to the vinyl. Okay, now that we've gotten it sewn to the vinyl, if you'll see this just is a 1/4 inch foot here, we're going to take this, flip it over, and then we're going to attach it to the other side with just a nice little top stitch. Now, because I have discovered something. So I was saying in a couple of videos ago that I never can get the binding done right with the edge stitch foot, and I didn't understand what I was doing wrong. But I discovered that when I don't press the binding, so when I'm doing a bias binding, I typically won't press it. I won't press it in half because it keeps it a little bit more flexible. But when I'm working with something like a straight edge binding rather than a bias binding, I do press it. So I found that when I use the pressed binding, it works really, really well to use the edge stitch foot. So that's what I've put in my machine now. As I was chatting, I went ahead and switched out my edge stitch foot. So I'm just going to do the same thing, except I think I might move it in just a little bit. So rather than a setting of 5, so all the way over, I did it kind of about halfway just so that it clips it nicely, or rather gathers it nicely, but yet isn't too far over to where it just looks off. So we're just going to put this through the edge stitch foot and bind it all the way down to the, so we're binding it to the front. So we applied the binding, we attached the binding to the back, now we flipped it over and we're now attaching it to the front. Okay, and now we've got our binding nicely attached to the front, and if you'll look, see how nice and clean that one is too. So I think that was the mystery, that was what I couldn't figure out, is when I press the binding and it's nice and flat and smooth, that's when I can use the edge stitch foot. But when I'm using a binding that I haven't pressed, that's when the edge stitch foot is not as effective. So anyhow, okay, so now it's time to attach the binding to the zipper. Now if you'll notice, I've got a couple of pins in here. And the reason being is because this is the second time I've now recorded this, because the first time I did, I accidentally attached it way over here. I don't know why I did that. So I put these pins here just to kind of give myself a little bit more guidance so that I don't have to pick this whole thing out again. So, you know, I would recommend that you go ahead and stick a couple pins in there just so that you can make sure that you know where this is all going to fall, so that it actually lays where you want it to. Anyhow, I put a zipper foot in my machine. A zipper foot is helpful. It helps you get right up next to the teeth. So if you have a zipper foot, I would always recommend that you use a zipper foot. And then if you need to move your needle, do not forget to move your needle, because if you don't, it's going to break. So I have moved my needle, I've attached my zipper foot, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew right along the edge of this fabric. Now, actually, I'm going to have to lift that up. I think I got over just a little bit. So I've got just a tiny little gap here between the teeth and the fabric, and then I'm going to sew it to where the edge of the zipper foot is right along the edge of the fabric, and this will give me just a little tiny bit of space, again, right here. And then we're going to sew all the way down this, and then we are going to start working on attaching the vinyl part of it. So again, we're just going to sew all the way down where the fabric meets the edge of the foot, and then I will see you when it's time to attach the vinyl. Okay, so now it's attached, and if you'll see, there's just a tiny bit of space here between the zipper and the edge of that fabric, and that's just to make sure that your zipper pull doesn't get caught up on that. But I did sew with my presser foot right along that line, so it is nice and clean and clear and straight. So now the next thing that we're going to do is attach the vinyl. So you're going to want to put your vinyl in the center of the zipper strip so that it lines up, you know, evenly with this side. And I'm saying this, emphasizing this, because as I said, this is now the second time that I have had to attach this, because the first time I wasn't paying any attention whatsoever, don't know why, and just attached it just wherever I wanted to, and it didn't work out very well for me. So I would really, I think that I would recommend that you make sure that your vinyl is right in the middle and that is attached in the right spot, so that you don't have to do like me and reattach it again. So what you're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in this. Now, I would not recommend that you put a pin into the part of the vinyl that you're going to see, because a pin is going to leave a mark in the vinyl. So I'm doing it right up here where it's covered with fabric, so we're not actually going to see it, but this is just kind of a placement mark for myself, so that I know that, you know, if I attach it this way, that I'm good to go, and I'm not going to be over or under like I was this last video that I did. So now what we're going to do is we are literally going to attach it in the exact same way. So we're just going to place the bound edge right here over our zipper tape. We're going to take our needle down and literally just sew it. So we're just going to make sure that we've got the same distance between the edge of the zipper and the fabric, and then we're going to sew right there along the edge of that presser foot all the way down. So there we go, now it's attached. So now we can go over to the table and discuss the steps that are next. Okay, so now we're back at the table, and we have gotten the zipper attached to the front, and if you'll notice, I did go ahead and put my zipper pull on. I chose to put my zipper pull on after I got this all sewn together, just because I did do a shorter zipper. You can put your zipper pull on before if you want to, just make sure that it stays out of the way, but like I said, I went ahead and did it. You know, I got it on there now. I also made my bias binding off camera. Like I mentioned, I will put a link to the bias binding video. We also made our handle. Okay, so here's the next step. So you want to go ahead and take your zipper part here and just kind of clip it in place. And the reason why I say we want to clip it in place is because it's going to determine where we attach the part to the bottom. Okay, so I know that everyone likes to have different distances, I guess you will, from the zipper teeth. So the reason why I leave this a little bit rough measurement down here is because I know that everybody likes to do things a little bit differently. So this is a little bit longer than you're going to need. So if we position this in the proper place and we position this in the proper place, then we're going to know exactly where we want to sew our vinyl. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of, you know, clip this here just to kind of get a placement. And next, what we're going to do is now we're going to attach, or we're not going to attach, we're going to go ahead and clip this right here on the edge, and then right here on the edge. And again, what this is doing is giving us the placement of where we want to attach this bottom part to the vinyl so that it all evens out. You're going to end up with a little bit of overage here, and we'll just trim it off at the end. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece over very carefully. We're going to take this off of here because obviously we don't want to attach it to the back. We just want to attach it to the vinyl. But I say carefully because I don't want this to shift. But we're going to go ahead and take this to the machine, and we're going to top stitch this facing here to the vinyl, and then we're going to bring it over here and we're going to trim the back of it, and then we're going to get ready to attach the whole thing together. So let's go top stitch this, and then we'll come back here and I'll show you the next steps. Okay, now we're ready to attach the facing to the bottom. And I do want to point out I did put a couple of pins here just to keep this from shifting. And I put it down way low so that you'll never see the pin marks. Like I said, you don't want to put pins in vinyl, but because we're going to be trimming this off, I went ahead and put them down here. Another thing that you can do to make sure that this stays in the exact same place that you want it to be is put a little bit of double stick tape back here. If that's what you want to do. I didn't, you know, I don't need to have the double stick tape myself, so I didn't do it, but it is something that will help you keep it from shifting. Anyhow, the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to sew this on with a top stitch. I have put my edge stitch foot back in because again, it's my absolute favorite way to do a top stitch because it ends up being nice and clean. And we're just literally going to go all the way down the facing here. So I'm just going to get that clip out of the way. And we're just going to sew all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so now we've got it attached to the bottom here, and it's nice, oops, hang on, and now it's nice and straight, just like we wanted because we use that edge stitch foot. Now if we flip this over, we do have some overage over here, and like I said, I built in just a little bit of overage. That way, depending on how you do your zipper thing up top, you can make some adjustments and not have to worry about this bottom. So I am going to take my scissors before I get back to the table and just actually, you know what? I think I'm going to trim this up with my rotary cutter, just kind of fold this fabric out of the way, trim off the excess, and then I will see you at the table for the next step. Okay, so now that we have the bottom facing attached as well, we are ready to attach this whole thing together. Now I do want to point out the way that I trimmed the vinyl off is I just folded my fabric up like this, took my ruler, gave myself 1/4 inch, and just lopped off the excess. Now, I know that the function that we just did where we just kind of, you know, did this and figured out where to place it and everything looked a little bit weird. But like I said, when I add a little bit of extra vinyl, because, you know, this can vary depending on how far apart you want your zipper from the fabric, I wanted to make sure that you had enough. So that's why if you want to do it a different way, please feel free. But I figured that that way would be the easiest for you. So that way you make sure that you're right on with your measurements. And if we look here, so we put this right here, this ends exactly where it's supposed to. So the next thing that we're going to do is attach all these pieces together. So just take your clips, clip all the way around. And what we're going to do next is just attach everything together. So we're just going to kind of make a little sandwich here with the back quilted piece and the front vinyl piece. We're going to go all the way around. So I just want you to take maybe a 3-inch stitch length, go all the way around this, kind of like a baste, but kind of not a full base, but go ahead and go all the way around this. And then we're going to come back here and we're going to trim everything up, trim our corners, and then we're going to start attaching the handle and the bias binding. Okay, so now we're back at the machine and we're ready to attach all of these pieces together. So I am going to go ahead and switch to my Teflon foot just because of this area right here is going to have vinyl to presser foot and I don't want it to get caught up. So I'm just going to go ahead and change my presser foot to the Teflon foot. And I'm going to follow this, and it's going to end up giving me a little bit less than 1/4 inch. But you know, visually when I'm actually doing it, I may give myself a little bit of extra space. But what you want to do is go all the way around this entire thing, so all four sides, and go all the way around with a 3-inch stitch length, and get it all put together. And then we'll go over to the table and we will discuss the trimming and everything else to finish this up. Okay, so now all of our pieces are sewn together. Now, some people like to trim before they go over to the machine. I don't like to when I'm working with something like vinyl because things can shift. And here's what I mean. I had clipped this right there where it needed to be, and it did a little bit of shifting. So I'm going to do the trimming now versus before I sew, just because, again, you know, I'm just accounting for any mistakes or shifting that occurred. So I'm just going to cut off my sides here. I'm not going to worry about that little bit up at the front that shifted, only because the binding is going to cover it. So I'm not, you know, not worried about it. But now it's all trimmed to size. Now there's 2 different ways that we can go about this. So if you don't like bias binding and you don't want to make bias binding and you don't want to have to worry about it, you can do straight binding on here, but you have to leave these straight cornered, okay? You cannot do rounded corners and use regular binding. You have to use bias binding. So if you don't want to do bias binding, you just want to do regular binding, you just leave these square. If you want to do bias binding, which I think looks a whole lot better, like I said, you're going to take a rounded item. I use these 2.5-inch circle rulers. Again, grabbed them on Amazon. I will put the link down below. And we just trim off the corners. So we are just gently rounding each of these corners. And once we're done with the corners, we are going to figure out where we're going to put our handle. We're going to clip our handle in place, and then we're going to work on our bias binding. So this project bag, I think, is a pretty decent size. You can modify it, make it smaller, make it bigger if you want to. Like I said, this is for little hands. So I chose to make one just kind of mid-range. Let me get my clips real quick. Okay. So where we're going to place the handles is going to be based on that center point. So let's find the center point. Let's see, I'm going to go just below there. So 8 inches is our center point. We're just going to make a little mark right there. And we're going to go, let's see if 8's our center. We're going to go 2 inches on each side. So if 8 is my center, then I'm going to place this one at 10 inches. And I'm going to place this one at 6 inches, okay? So right there. Now, I'm probably going to take this over to the machine and baste that in place just so it doesn't go anywhere. I'm not going to show that, but I am going to go ahead and baste it in place again so it doesn't go anywhere. Then the next thing that we're going to do is add our binding. So I want my binding to fold over and be visible on the front. So what we're going to do is actually attach it to the back. So we're going to take our binding and we're just going to fold it in half and get started. So we're just going to attach it to the back. So we're folding it in half. We are not pressing it, but we're folding it to the back. And we're just going to kind of clip it in place. And when we get over to the machine, actually, you know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I like to do my binding this way. You can do your binding like a quilt if you want to. Actually, I'm going to cut off that little part there because I don't really want to see it, but I'm going to do a straight cut here and you're going to see what my method is here. So when I start it, I'm going to fold it over like this. Okay, so just going to fold it down, make a little crease, and then I'm going to fold it over like this. And when I get over to the machine, you're going to see why I'm going to do that. But I'm going to do that, start at the bottom, and then we're going to take it over to the machine and we're going to attach the binding all the way around, okay, on this back side. And then once we have it attached all the way around on the back side, I'm going to show you how to kind of tuck it in there and finish it. And then once it's attached to the back side, we're going to flip it over and attach it to the front. And then when we do that, we will be done. So then I'll see you back over here at the table, but I'll do some explaining over at the machine so that you understand what we're about to do here. Okay, so I'll see you at the machine. Okay, now that we're back at the machine, here's how we're going to handle this binding. So as you saw over at the table, we cut this nice and straight. Then we folded it over at I think that's a 90-degree angle. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to attach it to the back. So this is the back of the project bag. And then we are going to just attach this and fold it over to the front. So let's go ahead and just sew. I'm going to sew just a little bit. Let me show you what we're going to do here. So we're going to sew it down, and this is completely open, by the way. We're not folded over just yet. We're going to sew it down a couple of inches past the edge here, past this edge. So let's just sew it down. Like I said, just a couple of inches. Okay, now we're going to cut it, cut our threads and start over. Okay, so just trim that little excess thread there. Now we're going to fold it over and we're going to start sewing. And we're going to attach this binding to the back. So we're going to fold it over like that. Okay, and then we're going to start sewing right about where we left off. So all the way down here. We're going to leave this completely open, and you're going to understand why here in just a little bit. But now we're just going to sew all the way around this outside edge and attach the binding to the back. Now I'm going to show you how to do one corner, and then I will speed up through and you can finish, or we'll speed up through and you can finish on your own until we get to the front. So we're nearing a corner, and I like to go just a little bit slower. So what I like to do is when I get to the part here where it starts to curve, okay, so I'm just going to go right here. When it starts to curve, that's when I just kind of take my finger over here and just kind of lift it up, and then just kind of let it curve, and I go real slow around the curve, and I'm going to pick up my presser foot there and just let it curve a little bit more. We're just going to keep walking around it with the presser foot. We're just going to keep getting that fabric out of the way. Just keep going gently around this curve here until we get back to the straightaway. Once we get back to the straightaway, then obviously we can just go, all the way as fast as we want to go. But now we're going to go all the way around the back, and then I will see you at the front, and I'll show you how to attach the front. Okay, so now we're nearing the end point here. So this is where we started, and we've left this little like pocket open. So what we're going to do is we're going to open this pocket as we move forward. So let's just carefully, slowly start sewing down a little bit, and I'm going to show you where I'm at. So you see I've got this pocket open. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim my fabric. So I'm going to trim this binding here right about where I ended it before. So let me see if I can show you a little bit better. So I have cut my fabric right here where we started sewing before. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up this pocket, and we're going to tuck this inside, okay? So we're just going to tuck it inside, fold it back over, and we're just going to keep sewing until we get where we started from. So you see right here is where it folded over, and it's inside this little pocket. We're just going to keep sewing until we end up back where we started. Okay, and now we're ready to flip it over to the front and sew it on to the front. So another thing I wanted to note is that when you're sewing your handles here, you want to make sure that they're face down, okay, or they're towards the vinyl. You don't want it to be up. You want it to make sure that they're face down this way. Okay, so now we're going to start sewing that binding on right where we finished. So we're just going to flip it over, and I'm going to go this, no I'm not going to go that direction, I lied. We're just going to flip it over, and I like to start sewing it on where I ended up. So right here, this is that little flap. So if you see where my finger is going through there, this is where we ended. So I'm going to go ahead and start sewing the binding on to the front, just right there. Now, I'm not going to use an edge stitch foot because I did not press this binding. Okay, so I'm going to go real slow, because what I'm trying to do is make sure that my binding is lined up with this little inside part here so that it just barely catches this, so that my needle just kind of barely catches the binding. I'm going to see how nicely I can do this, but anyway, I'm going to go all the way around, and then when I'm done with sewing this binding on, the project bag itself will be done. I find that a stiletto helps a little bit when you're putting on some binding. That way it can help you hold down pieces that you need to hold down, especially like on corners like this. So I just use my little stiletto to kind of hold the pieces in place as I stitch around. You don't have to, but I promise you it is pretty helpful. And there we have it. Our cute little project bag is done. And I don't think that I could be any more pleased with it than I am. The binding actually came out really good. And I'm gonna say that my binding has improved. So binding is one of those things that is a little bit difficult for, I'm going to say most of us, because I do believe that most of us struggle with having a good binding. And I want to just say that you're going to get better with binding the more you do it. The more you slow down, the more you pay attention to what you're doing. And here's something I want to show you. So I made this project for my daughter, I don't know, probably a year to 2 years ago. It was just a little makeup brush bag. You know, I saw a pattern somewhere, I wanted to make it, and I was so proud of it, but I was not as proud of my binding. So if you look here, it looks like that there, and the edges just, they're terrible. I mean, I probably could have done a worse job, but I don't know how, because it was really bad. Anyhow, this is what my binding used to look like. This is what my binding looks like now. And I wouldn't say that I bind an awful lot of things. So it's not like it's been years and years and years of constant practice. It's not, but it is practice. So I do want to say, if the binding is a little intimidating to you, I understand, but the more you do it, the better you're going to get. This little project bag is perfect for, you can embroider a little name down here. That's why I have this little flap here. I made some of these bags for my grandsons a couple years ago for Valentine's Day, and I stuffed them with books. Like, they had those little erasable coloring books, or those markers that color only on the book, and I filled the little bags with those, and I put their names across the bottom, and they were just the cutest things. So these bags are really super versatile. You can you know, give them to children and put books in them, coloring books, markers, whatever. You can have them for yourself for quilting projects or other projects that you're working on. Again, they're just super versatile, and I think that they come out really nice, and they're very easy to make. They're not hard. There's not a lot of steps, and there's not a whole lot of supplies that's needed to make them either. And this little handle, like I said, gives you some, you know, a carrying handle for a little one, or if it's for you and for your projects, you can hang them. Anyhow, this channel is in a phase right now of growth, and I'm very excited about it, but I don't get there without the likes and the comments and the shares and the subscribers and all those different things. So if you could go ahead and like this video and subscribe if you're not already subscribed, or leave me a little comment on what you want to see next, that is super helpful to me, and it helps me know that what I'm doing here is worth the time that it's taking. So anyhow, I would really appreciate if you would do those things for me, and I will see you guys on Friday. I hope that you guys have a wonderful week. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.